Welcome to lesson 3 of our cultural competency training. My name is Desiree Cochran Norfolk. This lesson we're going to be talking about social justice counseling. So in this lesson we're going to examine how the concepts of advocacy and privilege and oppression and power and empowerment are directly affecting both the counselors and the clients. We're also going to trace some of the historical milestones that shape counseling as a profession, really rooted in social justice, and explore practical ways to integrate advocacy at multiple levels. That's from the counseling room to broader systems change. So by the end of this lesson, you should have both the conceptual grounding and the practical tools to view yourself not just as a counselor, but as an advocate for equity and social well-being. So to start, let's establish foundational definitions here. Social advocacy is the act of arguing or standing on behalf of an individual or a group or an idea or an issue to influence the outcomes. It can take place in counseling sessions, schools, workplaces, communities, or even legislative spaces. Social justice is the belief in a just world where people experience fair treatment and equitable distribution of resources and opportunities. Social justice counseling is counseling that recognizes how oppression, privilege, and discrimination are going to shape mental health. And it goes beyond interpersonal work. It's going to include addressing systemic factors that are hindering well-being. And these constructs remind us that counseling is not just about individual healing, it's about dismantling barriers that keep people from accessing opportunities and resources that are necessary for thriving. So here are some more detailed constructs that are central to our practice. Social injustice is going to happen when benefits and burdens are unequally distributed. Some groups consistently receive less access to resources and opportunities, or even safety. Oppression is going to refer to power relations that are marked by domination, subordination, and resistance. And it's going to include oppression by force, which is imposing unwanted roles, experiences, or conditions that are causing harm. So, for example, segregation laws or forced relocations. Oppression by deprivation is withholding resources or opportunities that are needed for well-being. So, for example, unequal school funding or denial of health care. And understanding these concepts is going to help us recognize when a client's presenting issues are rooted not in individual pathology, but in systemic inequities that are restricting choices and creating trauma. So oppression is going to show up in different forms. The first form is primary oppression. This is direct, overt acts of harm, including both force and deprivation. Secondary oppression is benefiting indirectly from those acts. So, for instance, profiting from underpaid labor without really directly exploiting the workers. And then tertiary oppression or internalized oppression. This is when marginalized groups absorb negative dominant messages and then act on them, sometimes to seek acceptance from the dominant group. And the end result of those dynamics is the unequal distribution of power. Power means having control, autonomy, and influence over one's own life and over others. So when power is concentrated in the hands of a few, oppression is going to deepen. And as counselors, we really need to pay close attention to how that power is playing out in our clients' lives and also in our own relationships with the clients. There's 3 additional constructs that are going to round out our foundation here. Privilege, this is access to unearned advantages, resources, and benefits that are based on social group membership. And privilege is often invisible to those who have it, but it structures opportunities and the outcomes. Empowerment is a process where marginalized people or groups become unaware of the power dynamics. They're going to build skills and gain greater control over their lives. So, importantly, empowerment must not infringe on other people's rights, but it should extend to uplifting entire communities. Resilience, the strengths, the behaviors, the attitudes that clients use to cope with that stress. And while systemic barriers are going to create challenges, resilience demonstrates the creativity and the endurance of marginalized people and also of those communities. So recognizing resilience in our clients is going to prevent a deficit-based perspective. So although social justice issues have always shaped the counseling profession, recent developments have reinforced their central role. So at the profession's origins, figures like Clifford Beers spearheaded the mental hygiene movement, Carl Rogers applied psychology to social problems, and Frank Parsons advocated for poor and immigrant children through the Boston Vocational Bureau. So these pioneers really framed counseling as a response to social inequities. In 1971, Counseling and the Social Revolution was published, and that urged counselors to address racism and sexism and environmental destruction and war. In 1987, we had the ACA's predecessor, which published a human rights position paper. And then in 1992, Daryl Sue and colleagues introduced the multicultural counseling competencies. And then in 1998, Lee and Walls published Social Action, a mandate for counselors. And then by 1999, the ACA publications focused explicitly on racism. And then we jump to 2005, the revised ACA Code of Ethics emphasized the role of prejudice and systemic bias in misdiagnosis and treatment. And then in 2007, ACEs embraced the theme Vanguards for Change, ACEs and Social Justice. So building on that lineage, the Counselors for Social Justice, the CSJ division of the ACA, was founded in 2001. They developed the advocacy competencies in 2003. And so those competencies span 6 domains: the client and student empowerment, the client and student advocacy, community collaboration, systems advocacy, public information, social and political advocacy. So the takeaway here is advocacy is not optional for us. It is the ethical responsibility that is woven into the counseling profession from its inception to the present day. And why does it matter? Well, because social injustice directly impacts our clients' mental health. Discrimination is going to produce trauma symptoms, it's going to lower self-esteem, it's going to increase vulnerability to depression and anxiety, and poverty is going to amplify stress. It's going to create chronic barriers to health and education. And we have systemic barriers like language differences, inaccessible services, mistrust of institutions, and all of that's going to keep people from seeking or receiving effective care. So as counselors, our role is to recognize how these external conditions are going to shape client symptoms. We can't treat trauma or depression or anxiety effectively if we ignore the context in which they arise. So advocacy in practice can be visualized as kind of a 3-tier model. Tier 1 is self-reflection and bias interruption. So that's going to mean examining our own prejudices, our privileges, our own blind spots, and then we have to commit to interrupting them in real time. And then tier 2 is the client-centered barrier removal. So it's here that we're working directly with the clients to identify and address obstacles like inaccessible resources or any stigma that they have or unfair treatment. And then in tier 3, this is about partnerships and policy work. So at this level, counselors are going to collaborate with schools or community organizations, legislators, policymakers. That's going to help to create some systemic changes. So this model ensures that advocacy happens at every level: the interpersonal, and the systemic. Social justice counseling is rewarding, but it does come with challenges. So there may be some training gaps. A lot of counselors report that graduate programs give them very little preparation for advocacy work. There may be some ethical tensions. So we need to balance client autonomy with systemic advocacy. And when we do that, it can create dilemmas. Then there's the burnout risk. Constant engagement with injustice can lead to compassion fatigue. And then we get some pushback from the dominant groups because advocating for marginalized clients can be met with resistance, either from institutions or from individuals who benefit from that status quo. Then there may be logistical barriers, time, funding, organizational constraints, and those are going to limit how much advocacy we can do as counselors. So acknowledging these challenges is going to prepare us to face them with realistic expectations and supportive strategies. And despite those challenges, the rewards of social justice counseling are really substantial. We are going to empower our clients. Our clients are going to feel validated and supported and equipped to overcome systemic obstacles. We're going to improve outcomes. When those barriers are reduced, those clients are going to show stronger engagement and better resilience and more progress. It's also going to lead to professional growth. Counselors are going to develop broader perspectives and have a deeper cultural humility, and we're going to get some new skill sets. There's going to be societal gains because advocacy is going to contribute to fairer institutions and healthier communities. And so those benefits are going to ripple outward from the client to the counselor and from counselor to community. So as we're closing this lesson, let's connect this discussion back to addiction counseling specifically. Clients with substance use disorders often are going to face multiple levels of stigma and discrimination and systemic barriers. So counselors in this field are uniquely positioned to align advocacy with their role and setting. Whether it's in the schools or treatment centers or community programs, we need to be tracking small wins, like reducing stigma in intake procedures, or advocating for equitable access to recovery programs, or improving referral pathways. Those small steps matter, and over time, they're going to accumulate into larger systemic changes. Advocacy in addiction care is not about doing everything at once, but about consistently leveraging your role to expand equity and access.